The frozen wind tore through the canyon with a sound like howling wolves, and Wade Young knew from the way his mare was dancing sideways that something was wrong in the gathering darkness. It was late November in 1878, and the mountains surrounding his small cabin in the wilderness outside of Malad City, Idaho Territory, had already seen their first heavy snow. Wade had been checking his trap lines when the storm rolled in faster than he had anticipated, turning the world into a white blur that made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. His fingers were numb inside his leather gloves as he guided his horse down the familiar trail toward home, trusting the animal's instincts more than his own limited vision. That was when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the wind's constant roar. A voice, weak and trembling, calling out in a language he did not fully understand but recognized as belonging to the Shoshone people who had lived in these mountains long before men like him had arrived. Wade pulled his mare to a stop and listened intently, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. There it was again, coming from somewhere off to his left, down a steep embankment where the pine trees grew thick and dark. He dismounted carefully, his boots crunching through the crusted snow, and led his horse toward the sound. What he found made his heart clench with sympathy and alarm. A young woman, clearly of native heritage, was huddled against the base of a large pine tree, her body curled in on itself in a desperate attempt to preserve warmth. Her clothing was inadequate for the weather, consisting of a buckskin dress that was soaked through and torn in several places, and a thin blanket that had been wrapped around her shoulders but now hung limp and frozen. Her long black hair was matted with snow and ice, and her lips had taken on a dangerous blue tint. "Miss," Wade called out, dropping to his knees beside her. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, dark brown and glazed with cold and exhaustion. She tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering so violently that no coherent words emerged. Wade did not hesitate. He knew that exposure like this could kill a person in a matter of hours, and from the looks of her, she had already been out in the storm for far too long. "I am going to help you," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady even though his own heart was racing. "My cabin is not far. Can you stand?" she tried, but her legs buckled immediately. Wade caught her before she could fall face first into the snow, and without asking permission, he lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and he could feel the violent shivers that racked her entire frame. He carried her to his horse, and somehow managed to mount while still holding her, settling her in front of him so he could wrap his heavy coat around both of them. The ride back to his cabin took longer than usual because of the blizzard conditions, but his mare was sure-footed, and eventually the small log structure came into view through the swirling snow. Wade guided the horse right up to the door before dismounting, still cradling the young woman against his chest. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, grateful for the residual warmth from the fire he had banked that morning. He laid her down on his bed, which was nothing more than a wooden frame with a straw mattress and several thick blankets, and immediately set about building up the fire. The cabin was small, just one room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs, some shelves holding his supplies, and the bed in the corner. It was not much, but it was solid and warm, and right now that was all that mattered. Once he had a roaring fire going, Wade turned his attention back to his unexpected guest. Her eyes were closed and her shivering had not lessened. He knew he needed to get her out of those wet clothes, but he also knew he needed to respect her dignity. He grabbed one of his own dry shirts and a pair of long underwear from the trunk at the foot of his bed, along with several pairs of thick wool socks. "Miss," he said gently, touching her shoulder. "You need to get out of those wet clothes. I am going to turn my back and tend to my horse. These dry things are here for you. Can you manage?" She opened her eyes and looked at him, and for a moment he saw fear flash across her face. But then she seemed to understand that he meant her no harm, and she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Wade grabbed his coat and went back outside into the storm, leading his mare to the small lean-to shelter he had built on the side of the cabin. He took his time unsaddling her and rubbing her down, giving the young woman inside plenty of time to change. When he finally returned to the cabin, stamping snow from his boots, he found her still in the bed but now wearing his clothes, which were far too large for her small frame. She had pulled all the blankets up to her chin and was still shivering, though perhaps not quite as violently as before. Wade hung his wet coat by the fire and then pulled one of the chairs over to sit beside the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "I am Wade Young," he said, speaking slowly and clearly. "You are safe here. I mean you no harm." She watched him with those dark eyes, still wary but not quite as fearful as before. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper and heavily accented, but her English was clear enough. "Rose. Rose," he repeated, offering her a small smile. "That is a pretty name. Are you hurt anywhere?" "Besides the cold, I mean." She shook her head slightly. "Thank you," she managed to say through chattering teeth, "for helping." "Anyone would have done the same," Wade said, though he knew that was not entirely true. There were plenty of men in these parts who would have ridden right past her, or worse. The tensions between the white settlers and the native peoples had been high for years, marked by misunderstandings, broken treaties, and violence on both sides. But Wade had never seen the point in hatred. People were people, and anyone who needed help deserved to receive it. He stood and went to his shelves, pulling down a tin of coffee and some dried meat. "You need to get something warm inside you. Let me make you some broth." Over the next hour, as the storm continued to rage outside, Wade prepared a simple meal of hot coffee and a thin stew made from dried venison and the last of his potatoes. He brought it to Rose in a tin cup and watched as she sipped it slowly, her shaking hands gradually steadying as warmth began to return to her body. Color slowly came back to her cheeks and lips, and he felt a tremendous relief knowing that she was going to be all right. "What happened to you?" he asked gently once she had finished eating. "How did you end up out there in the storm?" Rose was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the cup in her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with sadness. "I was with my people. We were traveling to winter grounds. There were soldiers. They came and said we could not pass, that we had to go back to reservation. My father argued. He said we had permission, that this was land promised to us by treaty. They did not listen." Wade felt his jaw tighten. He had heard stories like this before, tales of the army forcing native peoples onto reservations that were too small and located on land too poor to sustain them, all in the name of making room for more white settlers. "There was shooting," Rose continued, her voice growing quieter. "I ran into the trees. I got separated from my people. I tried to find them, but the storm came. I walked for a long time. I thought I was going to die." "You are safe now," Wade assured her. "You can stay here until the storm passes and you are stronger. Then we will figure out how to find your people." She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Why do you help me?" "Most white men would not." Wade considered the question. "My mother always taught me that every life has value. She was a good woman, kind to everyone she met. She died when I was 16, but I have tried to live by her example. I could not have just left you out there." Rose was silent for a moment, then she said softly, "Your mother sounds like she was a good person." "She was," Wade agreed, feeling the familiar ache of loss that always came when he thought of his mother. The best I have ever known. The storm continued through the night, and Wade insisted that Rose keep the bed while he made himself as comfortable as possible on the floor near the fire, wrapped in his spare blankets. He slept fitfully, waking often to add more wood to the fire and check on his guest. Each time he looked over at the bed, he found Rose sleeping peacefully. The color fully returned to her face, her breathing deep and even. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed into gleaming white. Wade woke before dawn, as was his habit, and quietly began his morning routine, starting a fresh fire and putting coffee on to boil. The sound must have woken Rose, because when he turned around, she was sitting up in bed watching him. "Good morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she replied, and indeed she looked much improved from the half-frozen woman he had found the night before. "Thank you again for your kindness." "You are welcome," Wade said. He poured 2 cups of coffee and brought one to her. "I was thinking, once we have had breakfast, I could take you to Malad City. It is about 15 miles from here. There might be someone there who knows where your people went, or we could send word to the fort." Rose took the coffee gratefully, wrapping both hands around the warm cup. "I do not know if my people would have gone to town. They do not trust the soldiers, especially after yesterday." Wade nodded, understanding her point. "Well, you are welcome to stay here as long as you need to. I have supplies enough for 2 for a while, and when spring comes, I will plant a bigger garden." He meant it as a simple offer of hospitality, but something in Rose's expression shifted, a softness entering her eyes that had not been there before. "You would do that? Let me stay." "Of course," Wade said. "Though I imagine you would prefer to be with your own people. I just want you to know that you have options." Before Rose could respond, a sound from outside made both of them freeze. It was the sound of many horses, moving through the snow with purpose. Wade crossed quickly to the window and looked out, his breath catching in his throat at what he saw. Warriors. At least 50 of them, all mounted, all armed, arrayed in a semicircle around his cabin. They wore the traditional clothing and carried the weapons of the Shoshone people. And even from a distance, Wade could see that they were prepared for a fight if necessary. At the center of the group was a man who was clearly their leader, sitting tall and proud on a painted horse, his face stern and weathered. "Rose," Wade said quietly, not taking his eyes off the warriors. "I think your people found you." Rose hurried to the window, still wrapped in one of Wade's blankets, and when she saw the assembled warriors, she let out a small gasp. "That is my father," she said, pointing to the leader. "Red Eagle. He is chief of our band." Wade felt his stomach drop. He had taken in the daughter of a chief. No wonder they had come in such force. They probably thought he had kidnapped her or worse. "I need to go out and talk to them," Wade said, his mind racing. "They need to know you are safe and unharmed." "They will kill you," Rose said urgently, grabbing his arm. "If they think you have dishonored me, they will kill you without hesitation. My father is a fair man, but he is also protective of his children. I must speak to them first." Before Wade could argue, Rose had pulled open the door and stepped outside into the cold morning air, still wearing Wade's oversized clothes, her long black hair loose around her shoulders. The effect on the assembled warriors was immediate. Several of them urged their horses forward, but Red Eagle raised his hand and they stopped. Rose began speaking in Shoshone, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the snow-covered clearing. Wade could not understand the words, but he could hear the emotion in her voice, the urgency. She gestured back toward the cabin, toward Wade standing in the doorway, and then at herself. She spoke for several minutes, and Wade noticed that the tension in the warriors seemed to gradually ease. their grips on their weapons loosening slightly. When Rose finally fell silent, Red Eagle dismounted from his horse and walked toward her, his expression unreadable. For a terrible moment, Wade thought about reaching for his rifle, which was leaning against the wall just inside the door. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was the memory of his mother's teachings about trust and kindness. Perhaps it was the look on Rose's face, which showed no fear, only relief at seeing her father. Red Eagle reached Rose and placed his hands on her shoulders, looking her over carefully as if checking for injuries. Then he pulled her into an embrace that was so tender and filled with such obvious relief that Wade felt his own throat tighten with emotion. This was a father who loved his daughter deeply, who had probably spent the entire night searching for her in the storm, terrified of what he might find. After a long moment, Red Eagle released Rose and turned his gaze to Wade, his dark eyes sharp and assessing. He said something in Shoshone, a question from the tone of it, and Rose responded. Then Red Eagle began walking toward the cabin, toward Wade, and there was nothing for Wade to do but step outside and meet him face to face. The chief was slightly shorter than Wade but broader in the shoulders, with a presence that commanded respect. His face was lined with age and weather, and there was a scar running from his left temple to his jaw, evidence of battles fought and survived. When he stopped in front of Wade, the two men regarded each other in silence for a moment that seemed to stretch on forever. Then Red Eagle spoke, his English accented but clear. "My daughter tells me you saved her life, that you found her dying in the storm and brought her to your home, that you treated her with respect and kindness." "I did what anyone should do," Wade replied, keeping his voice steady despite the fact that his heart was hammering in his chest. "She needed help." "Not anyone," Red Eagle said, and there was a weight to those words that spoke of experiences Wade could only imagine. "Many of your people would have left her to die. Some would have done worse. You chose differently." "I could not have lived with myself otherwise," Wade said simply. Red Eagle studied him for another long moment, and Wade had the distinct feeling he was being measured in some fundamental way. Then the chief said, "You have given me back my daughter. For this I am in your debt. Among my people such a debt is not taken lightly." "You owe me nothing," Wade said quickly. "I am just glad she is safe." "Nevertheless, the debt exists," Red Eagle said firmly. He turned and called out something in Shoshone, and several of the warriors dismounted and began unloading items from their pack horses. Within minutes, Wade's small cabin was being filled with gifts. Beautifully tanned hides, bundles of dried meat, woven baskets filled with roots and berries, even a fine buffalo robe that must have been worth a small fortune. "This is too much," Wade protested, but Red Eagle silenced him with a look. "It is what honor demands," the chief said. "But there is something else. My daughter has also told me of the soldiers, of how they turned us back from land that was promised to us. This is not the first time this has happened. Each year, the promises made by your government mean less and less. The reservation they want us to move to permanently is poor land, where the hunting is scarce and the winters are hard. Many of our people have already died there." Wade felt a surge of anger at the injustice of it, even though he was just one man with no power to change government policy. "I am sorry," he said. "For what it is worth, I know that is not right." "It is worth something," Red Eagle said, "more than you might think. It tells me you are a man who sees with clear eyes." He paused, then continued, "Our winter camp is in a valley 2 days' ride from here. If you ever need help or if hard times come to you, you will find friends there. This I promise you." "Thank you," Wade said, moved by the offer. "That means a great deal." Red Eagle nodded, then turned back toward Rose, who had been watching the exchange with an expression Wade could not quite read. The chief spoke to her in Shoshone and she responded, but Wade noticed that she seemed reluctant, her eyes flickering between her father and Wade. Finally, Rose walked over to Wade, and he saw that there were tears glistening in her eyes. "I have to go with my people," she said. "But I wanted to thank you one more time. You saved my life, and you treated me with more kindness than I have known from any white man. I will not forget it." "I will not forget you either," Wade said, and he was surprised by how true those words were. In the short time she had been in his cabin, something had shifted in him, though he could not quite put his finger on what it was. Rose reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Perhaps we will meet again," she said softly. "Perhaps," Wade agreed, though he knew the chances were slim. Their worlds were too different, the divide between their peoples too wide. Rose released his hand and walked back to her father, who helped her onto one of the horses. One of the warriors gave her a thick fur to wrap around herself, and she settled into the saddle with the ease of someone who had been riding since childhood. The entire group began to move out, turning their horses back toward the mountains. But Wade noticed that Rose looked back once, her eyes meeting his across the distance. Then they were gone, disappearing into the forest, and Wade was left standing alone in front of his cabin, surrounded by the gifts they had left behind, wondering if he would ever see Rose again. The next few weeks passed slowly for Wade. He went about his usual routines, checking his trap lines, hunting for meat, cutting firewood to replenish his supply. But he found his thoughts constantly drifting back to Rose, to the way her eyes had lit up when she smiled, to the sound of her voice as she thanked him for saving her life. He told himself he was being foolish, that she was gone and that was the end of it. But the feeling persisted, a strange ache in his chest that he had never experienced before. December arrived with more snow, and Malad City began preparing for Christmas. Wade made one of his infrequent trips to town, needing to resupply on flour, coffee, and ammunition. The town was small but growing, with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a scattering of houses and businesses along the main street. Wade had never been one for socializing, preferring the solitude of his cabin in the mountains. But he knew the storekeeper, a middle-aged man named Thomas Porter, well enough to exchange pleasantries. "Heard you had some excitement out your way," Thomas said as he measured out flour into a cloth sack. "Indians came to your door, is what I heard." Wade was not surprised that the story had gotten around. News traveled fast in small communities, even in the dead of winter. They were looking for someone, a young woman who got separated from her people during that big storm a few weeks back. "And you helped her?" Thomas asked, his eyebrows raised. "I did," Wade confirmed. "Same as I would help anyone who needed it." Thomas nodded slowly, but Wade could see the disapproval in his eyes. Many of the white settlers in the area did not trust the native peoples, and some were actively hostile. Wade had never understood that mindset. As far as he was concerned, most conflicts came from fear and misunderstanding on both sides, and the cycle would never end unless someone was willing to extend trust first. He finished his business in town and was loading his purchases into his saddlebags when he heard a commotion coming from the saloon. Loud voices, the sound of furniture scraping across wood floors. Wade normally would have ignored it and ridden on, but something made him pause and listen. "I do not care what the treaties say," a voice was shouting. "This is white man's land now, and those savages need to understand that. If the army will not clear them out, then we will do it ourselves." Wade felt his jaw tighten. He recognized that voice. It belonged to Cyrus Murphy, a rancher who owned a large spread north of town and had a reputation for being a bully and a hothead. Wade had avoided the man as much as possible, But now he found himself tying his horse to the rail and walking into the saloon. Inside, he found Cyrus holding court with a group of about a dozen men, most of them ranchers and their hired hands. Cyrus was a big man, tall and broad with a red face and thinning hair, and he was clearly drunk even though it was barely past noon. "The problem is we have been too soft," Cyrus was saying. "We let them think they still have rights to this land. But this is American territory now, and Americans need to take what is ours by right." "That is a lot of talk, Cyrus," one of the other men said, though his tone was more amused than challenging. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I am proposing we form a militia," Cyrus said. "We go out to their camps, we burn them out if we have to, and we make it clear that they are not welcome here anymore. Let the army deal with the consequences after." Wade felt a cold fury building in his chest. He thought of Red Eagle, of the dignity and honor the chief had shown. He thought of Rose, of how close she had come to dying in that storm. The idea of men like Cyrus riding into their winter camp with torches and guns made him feel physically sick. "That is a terrible idea," Wade said, his voice cutting through the noise of the saloon. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at him. Cyrus's eyes narrowed. "Young, I should have known you would stick your nose in this. I heard you have been making friends with the savages." "I helped a woman who was dying," Wade said evenly. "And in return, her people treated me with more honor and respect than you are showing right now." "Honor," Cyrus spat. "You talk about honor with savages. They are animals, young. They do not understand honor, they only understand force." "You are wrong," Wade said. "And if you go through with this plan of yours, innocent people will die. Women, children. Is that what you want on your conscience?" "I do not have to listen to this," Cyrus snarled. "You are an Indian lover, plain and simple. Maybe we should run you out of the territory along with them." Several of Cyrus's friends stood up at that, their hands moving to the guns at their hips. Wade tensed, his own hand hovering near his revolver. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. But before things could escalate further, Thomas Porter appeared in the doorway along with the town's sheriff, a weathered older man named Henry Caldwell. "That is enough," the sheriff said, his voice carrying the authority of his position. "Cyrus, you are drunk and talking nonsense. Go home and sleep it off." "This is not over," Cyrus said, pointing a finger at Wade. "Mark my words, young, you will regret taking their side." He shoved past Wade and out of the saloon, his friends following. Wade let out a breath he had not realized he was holding and nodded his thanks to the sheriff. "You made an enemy today," Sheriff Caldwell said. "Cyrus is not the kind of man to forget a slight." "I will take my chances," Wade said. "I could not just stand there and let him talk about murdering innocent people." The sheriff sighed. "I understand your feelings, son, but these are complicated times. Feelings are running high on both sides, and it would not take much to spark a real conflict. You need to be careful." Wade nodded, understanding the warning even if he did not particularly like it. He left the saloon and mounted his horse, eager to get back to the peace and quiet of his cabin. But as he rode out of town, he could not shake the feeling that something bad was brewing, and that he had somehow put himself right in the middle of it. The ride back to his cabin took most of the afternoon, and by the time Wade arrived, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He was tired and cold and looking forward to a hot meal and his bed, but as he approached the cabin, he noticed something that made him pull his horse up short. Smoke was rising from his chimney. Someone was inside. Wade dismounted quietly and drew his rifle, approaching the cabin with caution. But when he pushed open the door, it was not Cyrus or any of his friends that he found. It was Rose, sitting by his fire, tending to a pot of something that smelled absolutely delicious. She turned when he entered, and a smile lit up her face. "Hello, Wade Young," she said. "I hope you do not mind me making myself at home. I remembered how you always kept the door unlocked." Wade stood frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "Rose, what are you doing here? Is everything all right? Is your father okay?" "Everything is fine," she assured him quickly. "My father and our people are safe in the winter camp. I came here because I wanted to see you." Wade closed the door behind him and leaned his rifle against the wall, his heart doing strange things in his chest. "You came here just to see me. But that is a 2-day journey in this weather." Rose stood up, and he noticed she was wearing traditional Shoshone clothing now, a beautiful buckskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork, and her hair was braided and woven with small ornaments. She looked stunning, and Wade felt his breath catch. "I told my father I needed time to think," Rose said. "About my life, about what I want. He understood. He has always been good about letting me make my own choices within reason. And what I realized, Wade, is that I could not stop thinking about you, about your kindness, about the way you treated me with such respect when you had no reason to, about the way you looked at me like I was a person and not just an Indian." Wade felt his throat go dry. "Rose, I do not know what to say." She moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "Then do not say anything. Just tell me if I am wrong. Tell me if I imagined the connection between us. Because if I did, I will leave right now and never trouble you again." "You did not imagine it," Wade said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I have thought about you every day since you left. I thought I would never see you again." Rose's smile was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "I hoped you would say that," she said softly. "Because I have fallen in love with you, Wade Young. I know it is fast and probably foolish, but I cannot deny what my heart tells me." Wade had never been a man of many words, had never been good at expressing his feelings. But in that moment, with Rose standing so close to him, looking at him with such hope and vulnerability, he found that the words came easy. "I love you too," he said. "I have loved you since the moment I found you in that storm. I think I knew it even then, though I was too much of a coward to admit it to myself." "You are not a coward," Rose said firmly. "You are the bravest man I know." And then there was no more talking, because Wade was cupping her face in his hands and kissing her. And she was kissing him back. And the rest of the world fell away until there was nothing but the two of them, and the fire crackling in the hearth, and the knowledge that something profound and wonderful was beginning. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Wade said, "What about your father? What about your people? They will not approve of this." "My father likes you," Rose said. "He has already told me that if I chose you, he would give his blessing. As for my people, there will be some who disapprove, just as there will be some of your people who disapprove. But we cannot live our lives for others, Wade. We have to live for ourselves." Wade knew she was right, though the thought of facing the prejudice and hatred that would surely come their way was daunting. But when he looked at Rose, when he thought about the possibility of spending his life with her, all of those concerns seemed suddenly small and manageable. "Then stay," he said. "Stay with me, not just for tonight, but always." "Are you asking me to marry you, Wade Young?" Rose asked, a teasing note in her voice. "I am," Wade said. "I know I do not have much to offer. This cabin is small and I am just a trapper and a hunter. But I will work hard to provide for you, and I will love you with everything I have. That I can promise." "That is all I need," Rose said, and then she was kissing him again, and Wade felt a happiness so pure and complete that it was almost painful. They spent the evening talking and planning, eating the stew Rose had prepared and making decisions about their future. Rose told him more about her life, about growing up as the daughter of a chief, about learning the skills and traditions of her people. Wade told her about his childhood in Missouri, about how his father had died when he was young, and how he and his mother had struggled to make ends meet, until she had remarried a kind man who had treated Wade as his own son. He told her about how he had come west after his stepfather had died, looking for a new start, and how he had eventually settled in these mountains because they reminded him of the stories his mother used to tell about heaven. "I think she would have liked you," Wade said. "My mother. She always said I should find a woman with a strong spirit, someone who would not be afraid to speak her mind." "I would have liked to meet her," Rose said. "She raised a good son." As the night grew late, Wade insisted that Rose take the bed again while he made up a pallet on the floor. Rose protested, but Wade was firm, saying that they would wait until they were properly married before sharing a bed. Rose seemed touched by his respect for her, and she kissed him good night with a tenderness that made Wade's heart ache in the best possible way. He lay awake for a long time after Rose had fallen asleep, listening to her gentle breathing and thinking about how much his life had changed in just a few short weeks. He had gone from being a solitary man, content with his own company, to being completely and utterly in love with a woman who was brave and kind and beautiful. It felt like a dream, and he was half afraid he would wake up and find that none of it was real. But when morning came, Rose was still there, smiling at him from across the cabin, and Wade knew that this was no dream. This was his life now, and it was better than anything he could have imagined. Over the next few days, they established a routine. Wade continued to check his trap lines and hunt, but now he came home to a warm cabin and a hot meal and Rose's smile. Rose kept the cabin spotlessly clean, prepared their meals, and began teaching Wade words and phrases in Shoshone. In turn, Wade taught her more English, though her grasp of the language was already quite good, and they spent long evenings sitting by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. It was during one of these evenings that Rose brought up a topic that Wade had been thinking about but had not known how to address. "We need to tell my father about our plans," she said. "It would be disrespectful to marry without his knowledge and blessing, even though he has already said he would approve." Wade nodded. "You are right. When do you think we should go?" "Soon," Rose said. "The weather is clear right now, but another storm could come at any time. And I want to make sure my father knows that I am safe and happy." They decided to leave the next morning, and Wade spent that evening preparing for the journey. He had never been to the Shoshone winter camp, and he would be lying if he said he was not nervous about it. But Rose seemed completely at ease with the plan, and her confidence helped to settle his nerves. The journey took 2 days, just as Rose had said, and it led them deep into the mountains, through valleys and canyons that Wade had never explored. Rose guided them with the ease of someone who knew every rock and tree, and Wade found himself marveling at her skill and knowledge. She pointed out animal tracks in the snow, identified birds by their calls, and knew which plants were safe to eat and which were poisonous. "You could survive out here on your own, could you not?" Wade asked at one point. Rose smiled. "Of course. My father made sure all of his children learned the skills they would need to survive. But surviving is not the same as living. Living requires more than just skills. It requires love and family and purpose." Wade thought about that as they rode, and he realized how profoundly true it was. He had been surviving for years, getting by on his own in his cabin in the mountains. But now, with Rose, he was truly living. They reached the Shoshone winter camp late on the second day. It was located in a sheltered valley surrounded by pine forests, and it consisted of about 30 lodges arranged in a loose circle. Smoke rose from the tops of the lodges, and Wade could see people moving about, tending to fires and caring for horses. Children played in the snow, their laughter carrying across the cold air. As Wade and Rose rode into the camp, people stopped what they were doing to watch them. Wade felt the weight of their gazes and tried not to show his nervousness. Rose, on the other hand, seemed completely relaxed, waving and calling out greetings in Shoshone. Red Eagle emerged from one of the larger lodges, and his face broke into a genuine smile when he saw his daughter. He strode over to them, and Rose dismounted to embrace him. They spoke in Shoshone for several minutes, and Wade caught his own name mentioned several times. Then Red Eagle turned to Wade, and his expression was serious but not unkind. "Rose tells me you wish to marry her," the chief said. Wade dismounted and stood before Red Eagle, meeting the older man's eyes with as much confidence as he could muster. "I do, sir. I love your daughter, and I will spend my life making sure she is happy and cared for." "You understand that this will not be easy," Red Eagle said. "There are many who will not accept a union between a white man and a Shoshone woman. You will face hatred from your own people, and there may be some among my people who will not welcome you." "I understand," Wade said, "but I love Rose more than I fear what others might think or do." Red Eagle studied him for a long moment, and then he nodded slowly. "That is a good answer. Very well. You have my blessing to marry my daughter, but I warn you, Wade Young, if you ever harm her, if you ever treat her with anything less than the respect she deserves, I will find you. And you will not enjoy what happens next." "I would never hurt her," Wade said firmly. "You have my word." "Then we will have a feast tonight to celebrate," Red Eagle declared. "It is not every day that my daughter chooses a husband." The feast was unlike anything Wade had ever experienced. The entire tribe gathered, and lodge after lodge contributed food until there was a veritable banquet spread out on buffalo robes in the center of the camp. There was roasted venison and elk, dried salmon from the rivers, pemmican and fry bread, and various dishes made from roots and berries that Wade could not identify but found delicious. There was music too, drums and flutes and voices raised in song, and children running everywhere in a joyful chaos. Wade sat beside Rose, with Red Eagle on her other side, and he was introduced to what felt like every single member of the tribe. There were elders who regarded him with cautious curiosity, warriors who sized him up with appraising eyes, women who smiled shyly, and children who stared at him with unabashed fascination. Rose translated for him when needed, and Wade did his best to be polite and respectful to everyone. As the evening wore on and the fire burned lower, Red Eagle stood and called for silence. The tribe quieted immediately, all eyes turning to their chief. "My daughter Rose has chosen a husband," Red Eagle said, speaking in English for Wade's benefit. "He is a white man, which some of you may find troubling. But he is also a man of honor who saved my daughter's life and asked nothing in return. He has shown respect for our people and our ways. I have given my blessing to this union, and I expect all of you to treat Wade Young as one of our own, as family." There was a murmur of assent from the gathered tribe, though Wade noticed that not everyone looked pleased. There were a few who scowled or turned away, making their disapproval clear. But the majority seemed willing to accept their chief's decision, and that was enough. After the feast, Rose showed Wade to a lodge that had been prepared for them. It was smaller than Red Eagle's but comfortable, with a fire pit in the center and sleeping furs arranged around the edges. Wade was exhausted from the journey and the emotional intensity of the evening, but he also felt a deep contentment. He was here in this place that was so different from anything he had known, and he was accepted. Or at least, he was accepted enough. "Thank you for doing this," Rose said as they settled down for the night. "I know it could not have been easy coming here and meeting my people." "It was worth it," Wade assured her. "Your father is a good man, and your people, they are not so different from any other folks. They want safety and happiness for their families, same as everyone." Rose smiled and kissed him gently. "You see with clear eyes, just as my father said. That is one of the reasons I love you." They spent 3 more days in the camp, and during that time, Wade learned more about the Shoshone way of life. He went hunting with some of the warriors and was impressed by their skill and knowledge of the land. He watched the women working on various crafts, creating beautiful beadwork and tanning hides with an expertise that took years to develop. He played with the children, who seemed to have overcome their initial shyness and now followed him around with endless questions. But he also saw the hardships they faced. Many of the people looked thin, underfed. The winter had been harsh, and the hunting had not been as good as in previous years. Red Eagle confided in Wade one evening that the tribe was considering moving to the reservation, not because they wanted to, but because they were running out of options. "The government promises food and supplies if we go," Red Eagle said, his voice heavy with frustration. "But I have heard stories from other tribes. The food is often late or rotten. The supplies are inferior, and we would be confined to a small area, unable to follow the game or gather plants as we have always done. It would be the death of our way of life." Wade wished he had some solution to offer, but he was just one man with no influence or power. All he could do was listen and offer what sympathy he could. On the 4th day, Wade and Rose prepared to return to the cabin. Red Eagle gave them supplies for the journey and made Wade promise to take care of his daughter. Several members of the tribe came to see them off, and Wade was touched by the warmth of their goodbyes. One elderly woman, who Rose said was a respected medicine woman, pressed a small bundle of herbs into Wade's hand and said something in Shoshone. "She says these will protect you and bring you good fortune," Rose translated. "She has blessed our union." Wade thanked the woman, who smiled and patted his cheek with a gnarled hand before walking away. The journey back to the cabin passed quickly, and soon they were home. Wade built up the fire while Rose unpacked their supplies, and there was a comfortable domesticity to it all that filled Wade with warmth. This was his life now. Rose was his family, and he was going to do everything in his power to make her happy. They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Malad City. Wade had worried about how the townspeople would react, but to his surprise, most seemed accepting, if a bit curious. The pastor, a kind man named Reverend Matthews, performed the ceremony without any fuss, and Thomas Porter stood as Wade's witness. Rose wore a dress she had made herself, combining elements of traditional Shoshone design with more conventional Western styling, and she looked so beautiful that Wade could barely speak when he saw her. After the ceremony, they returned to the cabin, officially husband and wife. That night, they truly became one, and Wade experienced a joy and intimacy he had never known was possible. Rose was patient and loving, and Wade felt a completeness that filled every empty place inside him. Winter gave way to spring, and Wade and Rose settled into their life together. They planted a large garden, and Rose showed Wade how to grow crops using techniques her people had perfected over generations. Wade continued to trap and hunt, but now he had Rose's help in processing the furs and meat, and they were able to produce much more than Wade had ever managed on his own. In May, Rose told Wade that she was pregnant. He was overjoyed and immediately became even more protective of her than he already was. Rose laughed at his concerns, assuring him that she was strong and healthy, and that Shoshone women often worked right up until the day they gave birth. But Wade insisted on taking over the heavier chores, not wanting her to strain herself. Summer arrived, hot and dry, and Wade heard disturbing news when he went to town for supplies. Cyrus Murphy had been stirring up trouble, giving speeches about the Indian problem and gathering support for his militia idea. Sheriff Caldwell had managed to keep things under control so far, but the tension was building, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before something snapped. Wade tried to keep the news from Rose, not wanting to worry her in her condition, but she had always been perceptive and she knew something was bothering him. Finally, he told her, and her face grew serious. "We should warn my father," she said. "If there is going to be violence, the tribe needs to be prepared." Wade agreed, and they made the journey to the Shoshone camp, though Wade insisted on a slower pace to accommodate Rose's pregnancy. When they arrived, Red Eagle listened to their warning with a grim expression. "This does not surprise me," the chief said. "There have been other incidents, tribal members harassed when they leave camp, hunting grounds we have used for generations suddenly claimed by white ranchers. It is clear that there are those who want us gone by any means necessary." "What will you do?" Wade asked. "We will be vigilant," Red Eagle said, "and if they come for us, we will defend ourselves. I do not want war, Wade, but neither will I let my people be slaughtered without a fight." Wade understood, though the thought of violence filled him with dread. He thought about Rose, about their unborn child, about the life they were trying to build. All of it felt suddenly fragile, threatened by forces beyond their control. They stayed at the camp for 2 days, and Wade helped the warriors prepare defenses, showing them some tricks he had learned during his own time in the army before coming west. He had never talked much about those years, about the things he had seen and done during the conflicts that had followed the Civil War. But now he drew on that experience, however reluctantly, to help protect Rose's people. When they returned to the cabin, Wade made sure his rifle and pistol were cleaned and loaded, and he kept them close at hand. He hated living in a state of constant vigilance, but he would not be caught unprepared if trouble came calling. July arrived, scorching and tense. Rose's belly had grown round and full, and Wade calculated that the baby would come sometime in September. He found himself dreaming about what the child would look like, whether it would be a boy or a girl. He hoped for a healthy child, one who would grow up in a world more peaceful than the one they were living in now. On a hot afternoon in late July, Wade was out behind the cabin chopping wood when he heard the sound of horses approaching. He set down his axe and wiped the sweat from his brow, walking around to the front of the cabin just in time to see a group of riders coming up the trail. There were 5 of them, and Cyrus Murphy was at their head. Wade felt his stomach sink, but he kept his expression neutral as the men reined in their horses in front of his cabin. Cyrus was grinning, a mean expression that did not reach his eyes. "Afternoon, young," Cyrus said. "Heard you went and married yourself a squaw." "Wanted to come see for myself if it was true." Wade's jaw tightened at the slur, but he kept his voice level. "My wife is inside, and I would appreciate it if you and your friends moved along." "Your wife," Cyrus repeated, laughing. "That is rich." "You actually think the law recognizes a marriage between a white man and an Indian? You are living in sin, young, and you are a disgrace to your race." "I do not care what you think," Wade said. "Now get off my property." Cyrus's grin faded, replaced by a cold hardness. "You have been warned, young. You are on the wrong side of this. When we move against the savages, we will remember who our friends were and who our enemies were." "Is that a threat?" Wade asked, his hand moving subtly toward the pistol at his hip. "It is a promise," Cyrus said. Then he wheeled his horse around and the group rode off, leaving Wade standing alone with his heart hammering and his hands shaking with suppressed rage. He went inside to find Rose standing by the window, her face pale. "I heard," she said. "Wade, maybe we should leave. Go somewhere else, somewhere we can start fresh." Wade wanted to agree, wanted to pack up and take her far away from all of this, but he also knew that running would not solve anything. "This is our home," he said firmly. "I will not let them drive us away. But I think we need to be prepared for trouble." That night, Wade barely slept, his ears attuned to every sound outside the cabin. But the night passed without incident, and when morning came, he began to hope that perhaps Cyrus had just been blowing hot air. He should have known better. 3 days later, Wade woke to the smell of smoke. He bolted upright, his first thought that the cabin was on fire, but when he looked around, everything seemed fine. Rose was already awake, standing at the window, and when Wade joined her, his blood ran cold. Smoke was rising from the direction of the Shoshone camp, dark columns of it staining the morning sky. "No," Rose whispered, her hand going to her mouth. "No, please, no." Wade was already moving, pulling on his boots and grabbing his rifle. "Stay here," he ordered Rose. "Lock the door and do not open it for anyone but me." "I am coming with you," Rose said, her voice firm despite the tears streaming down her face. "That is my father, my people." "You are pregnant," Wade said desperately. "Rose, please, I will bring news, I promise, but I need to know you are safe." Rose hesitated, and Wade could see the war playing out on her face, the desire to be with her people warring with the need to protect their unborn child. Finally, she nodded, and Wade kissed her quickly before running out to saddle his horse. The ride to the Shoshone camp took less than an hour, and what Wade found when he arrived was a scene from his worst nightmares. The lodges were burning, the carefully constructed homes reduced to charred skeletons. Bodies lay scattered across the ground, men and women and even children, cut down without mercy. The horses had been scattered or killed, and the supplies that had taken so much effort to gather were destroyed. Wade dismounted on legs that felt like they would not hold him and walked through the carnage, looking for survivors. He found a few, the wounded crying out in pain, and he did what he could to help them, but it was clear that the attack had been brutal and thorough. He found Red Eagle near the center of the camp, lying on the ground with blood soaking the earth around him. For a terrible moment, Wade thought the chief was dead, but then Red Eagle's eyes flickered open. "Wade," Red Eagle rasped, his voice barely audible. "They came at dawn. Cyrus Murphy and his men. We tried to fight, but we were not prepared. I am sorry. I failed my people." "Do not say that," Wade said, dropping to his knees beside the chief. "This was not your fault. Let me get you to a doctor." "It is too late for that," Red Eagle said, and Wade could see that he was right. The chief had been shot multiple times and there was too much blood. "Listen to me. You must protect Rose, protect my grandchild. They are all I have left." "I will," Wade promised, his voice breaking. "I swear it." "Good," Red Eagle said. "You are a good man, Wade Young. I am glad my daughter chose you." His eyes drifted closed, and a moment later he was gone. Wade knelt there in the blood-soaked earth, holding the hand of a man he had come to respect and admire, and he wept. For Red Eagle, for all the lives lost, for the senseless cruelty of it all. But he could not stay. There were survivors who needed help, and Rose needed to know what had happened. Wade forced himself to stand and went about the grim work of organizing the survivors. There were only about 15 left, mostly women and children, along with a handful of wounded warriors. Wade helped them gather what supplies they could salvage, and then led them back to his cabin, knowing it was not ideal but unable to think of anywhere else that would be safe. Rose was waiting on the porch, and the moment she saw the group approaching, saw the blood and the grief on their faces, she knew. She did not ask about her father. She did not need to. She simply opened the door and began helping the survivors inside, her face set in a mask of determination, even as tears streamed down her cheeks. Wade's small cabin was suddenly packed with people, but no one complained. The women helped tend to the wounded while Wade rode to town to fetch the doctor. He also went straight to Sheriff Caldwell and told him everything. The sheriff's face grew darker and darker as Wade spoke. "This is bad," Caldwell said when Wade finished. "This is really bad. Cyrus has gone too far this time. But Wade, you need to understand, there are a lot of folks in this territory who will see this differently than you do. They will say the Indians were a threat, that Cyrus was just defending white settlers." "They murdered children," Wade said, his voice shaking with fury. "How can anyone defend that?" "I am not saying it is right," Caldwell said. "I am just telling you how it is. But I will do what I can. I will get a federal marshal involved if I have to. Cyrus will answer for what he has done." The doctor, a competent man named Alan Harrison, came back to the cabin with Wade and spent hours tending to the wounded. Some would recover, but others were too badly hurt. 2 more died that night, including a little boy who could not have been more than 6 years old. Wade helped bury him in the forest near the cabin, and he had to walk away before he finished because he could not stop the sobs that were tearing out of him. Rose found him there, leaning against a tree, his body shaking with grief and rage. She did not say anything. She just wrapped her arms around him and held him, and they stood there together in the gathering darkness. 2 people trying to find some small measure of comfort in a world that suddenly felt unbearably cruel. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of Wade's life. He and Rose did everything they could to care for the survivors, sharing their food and supplies even though it meant they would have very little for themselves come winter. Some of the survivors eventually left, traveling to find other bands of Shoshone or to go to the reservation, but a handful stayed, including an elderly woman named White Dove who had been a close friend of Rose's mother, and 2 warriors named Standing Bear and Swift River who were determined to see justice done. Sheriff Caldwell arrested Cyrus Murphy and several of his men, but to Wade's fury, they were released on bail after just 3 days. The trial was set for September, and Wade was told he would need to testify. He agreed without hesitation, determined to see Cyrus pay for what he had done. But Cyrus was not done making trouble. In late August, Wade's barn, which he had built just that summer, was burned to the ground in the middle of the night. No one was hurt, but it was clear that Cyrus was trying to send a message. Sheriff Caldwell could not prove who was responsible, but everyone knew. Wade refused to be intimidated. He rebuilt the barn with help from Standing Bear and Swift River, and he made sure someone was on watch at all times, keeping an eye out for any further attacks. In early September, Rose went into labor. It was long and difficult, and Wade spent the entire time pacing outside the cabin, listening to her cries and feeling utterly helpless. White Dove attended her, having delivered countless babies in her long life, and she finally emerged to tell Wade that he had a son. Wade rushed inside to find Rose exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle in her arms. The baby had a thick shock of dark hair, and his eyes, when they opened, were a deep brown. Wade had never seen anything so perfect in his life. "What should we name him?" Rose asked softly. Wade thought for a moment, then said, "William, after my stepfather. He was a good man, and I would like our son to carry his name." "William," Rose repeated, testing it out. "William Young, I like it. And for a middle name we should use my father's name, William Red Eagle Young." Wade felt his throat tighten with emotion. "That is perfect," he managed to say. Over the next few weeks, Wade divided his time between caring for his new son and preparing for the trial. William was a good baby, quiet and content, and Wade found that holding him helped ease some of the anger and grief that had been consuming him since the attack on the camp. The trial began in late September, held in the small courthouse in Malad City. Wade testified about what he had found at the camp, describing the bodies, the destruction, the survivors. He told the court about Cyrus's visit to his cabin, about the threats that had been made. Standing Bear and Swift River also testified, along with several of the other survivors. But the defense brought in witness after witness who swore that Cyrus and his men had been nowhere near the Shoshone camp on the day of the attack. They claimed that the camp had been attacked by a rival tribe, or by renegade Indians, or by any number of other explanations that did not involve white men. The jury, made up entirely of white settlers, deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict of not guilty. Wade felt like he had been punched in the stomach. He looked over at Cyrus, who was grinning triumphantly, and it took every ounce of self-control he possessed not to pull his gun and shoot the man right there in the courtroom. Rose, who had been sitting beside him, placed a hand on his arm. "It is not over," she said quietly. "Justice will come, maybe not from this court, but it will come." Wade wanted to believe her, but in that moment he felt only despair. They left the courthouse and rode back to the cabin in silence, both of them lost in their own dark thoughts. But life had a way of moving forward, whether you were ready or not. William grew quickly, becoming more alert and aware with each passing day. The survivors who had stayed with Wade and Rose gradually built new lives, constructing small lodges near the cabin and helping with the daily work of survival. It was not the life any of them had wanted, but it was a life, and that was something. Winter came early that year, and it was harsh. Food was scarce, and there were days when Wade wondered if they would make it through. But they managed, drawing on the combined skills and knowledge of both white and Shoshone traditions. They hunted together, preserved food together, kept each other warm and safe. And slowly, gradually, Wade began to feel something that might have been hope. He looked at Rose, at William, at the small community that had formed around them, and he thought that maybe, just maybe, they could build something good here. Something that honored the memory of Red Eagle and all the others who had been lost. Spring arrived with a burst of green growth and warmer temperatures, and with it came news. Sheriff Caldwell rode out to the cabin one morning with a grim expression. "Cyrus Murphy is dead," the sheriff said without preamble. "Found shot in his home last night. No witnesses, no suspects." Wade felt a complicated mix of emotions. He could not claim to be sorry that Cyrus was gone, but he also knew that this would likely bring more trouble. "Do you think it was someone from the tribe?" he asked. Caldwell shrugged. "Could have been. Could also have been one of his own men or someone else he wronged. Cyrus made a lot of enemies, but there are folks in town who are already calling for retaliation against the Indians." "Thought you should know." Wade thanked the sheriff for the warning and immediately began making preparations for another potential attack. But days passed, then weeks, and nothing happened. It seemed that without Cyrus to lead them, his followers had lost their appetite for violence. As spring turned to summer, Wade and Rose began to truly thrive. Their garden produced abundantly, Wade's trap lines were successful, and William was growing into a healthy, happy child. The small community around the cabin continued to function, with everyone contributing and sharing in the work and the rewards. One evening in late July, as Wade and Rose sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Rose said, "I am pregnant again." Wade turned to her with a huge smile. "Really, really, Rose confirmed, laughing at his excitement. "Our son will have a sibling by next spring." Wade pulled her close, careful of her still healing body, and kissed her gently. "I love you," he said. "I cannot believe how lucky I am to have you." "I am the lucky one," Rose said. "You gave me a home and a family when I had lost everything. You have shown me that there is still good in the world, even when everything seems dark." They sat there together as the light faded, holding hands, surrounded by the sounds of the forest and the life they had built together. It was not the life either of them had imagined when they first met, but it was theirs, and it was good. The second baby arrived in March of 1880, a little girl with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. They named her Sarah White Dove Young, honoring both Wade's mother and the elderly woman who had become like a grandmother to their children. As William and Sarah grew, Wade and Rose taught them everything they knew. The children learned to speak both English and Shoshone, to track animals and identify plants, to respect the land and all living things. They grew up surrounded by love and by a community that valued both their white and native heritage. The years passed peacefully. The tensions between white settlers and native peoples did not disappear, but in their small corner of Idaho territory, Wade and Rose had created something rare. A place where people from different backgrounds could live together in harmony. Standing Bear and Swift River, both married women from the community, and soon there were more children running around, playing together without concern for the differences that divided their elders. White Dove lived to see her 80th year before passing peacefully in her sleep, and her funeral was attended by both white and Shoshone mourners who came from miles around to pay their respects. Wade's cabin, which had once been a simple bachelor's shelter, was expanded multiple times to accommodate their growing family. A third child arrived in 1882, a boy they named Thomas Red Cloud Young, and a fourth, another daughter named Mary Running Stream Young, was born in 1885. The town of Malad City grew and changed too. More settlers arrived, bringing with them new ideas and new ways of thinking. There were still those who harbored prejudice, but they were slowly becoming the minority rather than the majority. Sheriff Caldwell retired and was replaced by a younger man who believed in equal justice for all people, regardless of race. In 1890, Wade was asked to serve on the town council, representing the interests of the growing mixed community on the outskirts of town. He accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to continue working toward a more just and peaceful world. Rose often accompanied him to meetings, and her intelligence and wisdom quickly earned her the respect of even the most skeptical council members. The children grew into adults. William became a skilled hunter and tracker, eventually taking over much of the work that Wade had done when he was younger. Sarah developed a talent for healing, learning everything she could from the various medicine men and women in the community, as well as from Dr. Harrison in town. Thomas showed an aptitude for working with wood, becoming a talented carpenter. And Mary, the youngest, surprised everyone by developing a passion for education, eventually becoming a teacher at the small school that had been built in Malad City. Wade and Rose grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces becoming lined with the years. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by the trials they had faced and the life they had built. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Wade took Rose back to the spot where he had first found her, half frozen in the snow. It was summer now, and the forest was lush and green, filled with the sounds of birds and insects. They stood there together, remembering that night, thinking about how much had changed. "Do you ever regret it?" Wade asked. "Choosing me, I mean. Your life would have been so different if you had not." Rose turned to him, and there was such love in her eyes that Wade felt his breath catch. "I have never regretted it for a single moment," she said. "You saved my life, Wade, in more ways than one. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You loved me when I thought I had lost everything. How could I ever regret that?" Wade pulled her close, holding her as he had held her so many times over the years, and he thanked whatever force had brought them together. He had gone from being a lonely man in a small cabin to being the patriarch of a large, loving family. He had witnessed injustice and cruelty, but he had also seen compassion and bravery. And through it all, Rose had been by his side. As they walked back to their home, hand in hand, Wade thought about the 50 warriors who had come to his door all those years ago, how terrified he had been, and how wrong he had been to fear them. Red Eagle had given him the greatest gift imaginable when he had allowed Wade to marry Rose. And Wade had spent every day since trying to be worthy of that gift. The years continued to pass. Wade and Rose became grandparents, then great-grandparents. Their family tree spread and grew, branches intertwining, creating something entirely new. A family that was both white and native, that honored the traditions of both cultures while creating new traditions of their own. In 1898, Wade Young passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 64, surrounded by his wife and children. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, both white and native, all of whom had been touched by his kindness and his commitment to justice and equality. Rose lived for another 7 years, spending her time surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories about their father and about her own father, keeping the memories alive. She spoke of the hard times, but she also spoke of the joy, of the love that had sustained them through everything. When Rose died in 1905 at the age of 63, she was buried beside Wade on a hill overlooking their land, beneath a spreading pine tree. Their children carved a stone marker that bore both their names and a simple inscription: 2 hearts, 1 love, 1 family. The community that Wade and Rose had built continued long after they were gone. Their children and grandchildren continued to work toward the dream of a world where people could live together in peace, regardless of their differences. It was not always easy, and there were setbacks along the way, but the foundation that Wade and Rose had laid was strong, built on love and respect, and an unshakable belief in the worth of every human being. And in that small corner of Idaho, in the mountains where Wade had once lived alone, their legacy lived on, a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of love, and the possibility of redemption even in the darkest of times. The cabin, expanded and improved over the generations, remained in the family, a gathering place where descendants would come to hear stories of the cowboy who had shared his cabin with a shivering native girl, and how that single act of kindness had changed the course of countless lives. Their story was passed down through the generations, told around fires on cold winter nights, a reminder that even in times of great division and hatred, love could triumph. That one person choosing compassion over fear could make a difference. That families could be built across the lines that divided people, creating something stronger and more beautiful than anything that had come before. William Red Eagle Young, their firstborn son, lived to be 82 years old and saw the beginning of the 20th century give way to modern times. He often spoke of his parents with reverence and love, telling anyone who would listen about the courage it had taken for a white cowboy and a Shoshone woman to build a life together in a time when such things were rarely accepted. Sarah, the healer, used her skills to help countless people throughout her long life, never turning anyone away regardless of their ability to pay or their background. She inherited her mother's grace and her father's determination, and she passed those qualities on to her own children. Thomas became known throughout the territory for his craftsmanship, building homes and furniture that would last for generations. Every piece he created carried a small mark, a combination of his initials, and a symbol his mother had taught him, a blessing in the Shoshone tradition. And Mary, the teacher, educated hundreds of children over her career, always emphasizing the importance of understanding and respecting different cultures. She wrote a book about her parents' story that was published in 1920 and became required reading in schools throughout Idaho. The land around the cabin was eventually designated as a historic site, preserved so that future generations could visit and learn about the remarkable couple who had lived there. The cabin itself was maintained exactly as Wade and Rose had left it, with their belongings still in place, a window into a life well lived. Historians would later write about Wade Young and Rose Red Eagle Young, analyzing their relationship in the context of the times they lived in, marveling at their courage and their commitment to each other. But what those historians could never fully capture was the simple, profound love that had been at the heart of everything. The way Wade had looked at Rose every morning as if seeing her for the first time. The way Rose had touched Wade's face with such tenderness. The thousand small moments of kindness and affection that had made up their daily lives. Their story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was a story of two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had chosen, every single day, to love and honor and protect each other. It was a story of building a life together, one day at a time, through joy and sorrow, through hardship and abundance. And it was a story that proved that love, real love, could transcend any barrier, overcome any obstacle, and create something lasting and beautiful in even the harshest of landscapes. The mountains still stood where they had always stood, ancient and unchanging. The forest still grew thick with pine and fir. The seasons still turned, winter giving way to spring, summer fading into fall. And on a hill overlooking it all, beneath that spreading pine tree, Wade Young and Rose Red Eagle Young rested together, their love story complete, their legacy secured, their dream of a better world carried forward by the family they had created and the example they had set. In the end, it was a simple story, really. A cowboy had found a shivering girl and had chosen compassion over indifference, and from that single choice everything else had flowed. A love that had endured, a family that had flourished, a community that had prospered. A legacy that would never be forgotten. And if you listened carefully on quiet nights in those mountains, some said you could still hear echoes of their laughter, carried on the wind, a reminder that love never truly dies. It simply changes form, living on in the hearts and lives of those who come after, a light in the darkness, a hope for the future, a promise that no matter how difficult the times, there will always be those who choose kindness, who choose love, who choose to build bridges instead of walls. That was the true meaning of Wade and Rose's story, the lesson that their descendants carried forward into each new generation. And it was a lesson that would never grow old, never become outdated, never cease to be relevant. Because at its core, it was a lesson about what it means to be human, to see beyond differences, to recognize the sacred worth of every soul, and to understand that in the end, we are all just people trying to find our way, looking for connection, for meaning, for love. Wade Young had been a simple cowboy with a small cabin in the mountains. Rose Red Eagle had been a chief's daughter, separated from her people in a storm. Their meeting had been chance, but what they had built together had been anything but accidental. It had been deliberate, intentional, a conscious choice made over and over again to stand together against a world that often seemed determined to tear them apart. And they had won. Not in the way that battles are won, with victory and defeat, but in the way that matters most, by creating something good and lasting that would outlive them both. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death. But it also ended with life, abundant and thriving, spreading out in all directions like the roots of that old pine tree beneath which they were buried. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, each carrying a piece of Wade and Rose forward into the future. And so the story was complete. The cowboy who had shared his cabin with a shivering native girl, the 50 warriors who had come to his door, the love that had blossomed against all odds, the family that had been built, the community that had grown, the legacy that would endure. It was a story of the Old West, of a time that was rough and dangerous and often cruel. But it was also a story of hope, of the possibility of change, of the power of individual choice to make a difference. It was a story that needed to be told, to be remembered, to be passed down. And now it has been told in full, holding nothing back. The joy and the sorrow, the triumph and the tragedy, the beginning and the end. The complete story of Wade Young and Rose Red Eagle Young, two souls who found each other in the wilderness and built something beautiful that would last forever. Their cabin still stands in those mountains, preserved and protected, a monument to their love. And sometimes, on clear days when the sun shines just right, you can see two figures walking hand in hand along the path that leads to the door, their laughter echoing through the trees, their love as alive and vibrant as it was on the day they first met. This is their story, told in full. And it ends here, with love triumphant, with family thriving, with a legacy secured. Wade and Rose Young lived, they loved, and they left the world better than they found it. What more could anyone ask for? What better ending could any story have?